Morning, church. Let the dead bury their own dead. Let's just get right to the good stuff this morning, shall we? And look, I don't know how I keep drawing from this Jeopardy category entitled Things Jesus Should Not Have Said, but y'all, we need to investigate this. Will y'all help me investigate this, please? Send a strongly worded email to mkinman at allsaints-paths.org. Let the dead bury their own dead. I mean, let's just start with the obvious. Anyone who's lived more than 5 minutes knows that real life doesn't work this way. Let the dead bury their own dead. Jesus, what are you saying? The dead obviously can't do that. Everyone knows, especially with the week we have just endured and witnessed and are enduring and witnessing, especially those of us who are Black and AAPI, we know that the dead don't bury their own dead, but it's the living who have to do that. It's the living who keep the memories going, who share the stories, light the candles, lay the flowers, write the cards, post the pictures, write the obituaries, make the arrangements, cry the tears, sort the closets, pack the boxes, carry the caskets, sing the hymns, pour the libations, hug the mothers, comfort the fathers, and explain to the children, let the dead bury their own dead. What could Jesus possibly mean? And how could Jesus possibly not understand a simple truth that can be learned by simply living? Let the dead bury their own dead. This phrase feels incompatible with the Jesus who wept. You see, Jesus didn't keep this same energy for Lazarus. And this phrase feels incompatible with the Jesus in this same story who healed Peter's mother-in-law just so she would not die. And this phrase feels incompatible with my own, and I'm sure many of our own personal experiences with the Spirit of God. In the past several years, I've physically spent time in lament at the memorial sites of George Floyd, right here in Pasadena and Altadena, Anthony McLean and Charles Towns. And earlier this week, I physically spent time at the memorial site for the victims at Monterey Park. And with each visit, it was a combination of grief and the Spirit of the living God that I believe took me to these places. And many of the many times I've been and the many scriptures that came to my mind as I stood in these spaces, let the dead bury their own dead, was not one of them. And you know, usually with this particular Jeopardy category, we're able to parse a saying of Jesus in its original context and gain some clarity. And in the context, what some believe is happening here is that this person's father hasn't died yet, but is very, very ill and is possibly on hospice or something of the equivalent. And so he's saying to Jesus, I'm going to follow you, but my father is on hospice and he'll pass any day now. And as soon as that's taken care of, Jesus, I'll be with you. And so now, as we understand the man's statement in its context and that his father hadn't died yet, but may have been on hospice, Jesus still looks terrible. I mean, imagine if this was the answer of a prospective employer asking us about a start date for a new job. Per our last email, let the dead bury their own dead. That's a red flag. There are jobs out there like that. many of them at Amazon warehouses, but that's another sermon. But beloved, in the interest of time, I'll just get into it. I believe Jesus, in this passage, as Jesus is prone to do, is using hyperbole to illustrate a larger spiritual truth. And that larger spiritual truth that Jesus is forcing us to grapple with in this text is best captured not necessarily in a statement, but is actually best captured in a question. And if you've heard me preach in the last several months, you may remember this question, but the question is simply this: what are we willing to pay for the future we're wanting to see? What are we willing to pay for the future we're wanting to see? You see, the specifics of this situation aren't quite as important as the reality that there is a call and an opportunity to follow Jesus and to co-create a future with Jesus called the kingdom of God. And the response to that call and the response to that opportunity is a negotiation. And beloved, we find out through this gospel story that Jesus doesn't really negotiate all that nicely. And it would seem on the surface that Jesus is denying this man the opportunity to grieve, but with this jarring statement, Jesus is actually presenting him and presenting us with an opportunity to grapple with the cost of what following him will actually be. How's that for a job posting? You see, capitalism is real good at getting us to ask ourselves, how much does a job pay? But not nearly as good as getting us to ask ourselves, how much does a job cost? Jesus here is being upfront and forcing us and this man in the text to grapple with how much co-creating the future with him will cost. Look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, the future is not free. Oh, that neighbor didn't believe you. Find another neighbor and say, other neighbor, the future is not free. It's going to cost us something. There's an urgency in this story. The other thing that this story of Jesus is revealing is that, beloved, there are some things that are even worse than the grave. The other side to this story is that it's revealing that there are some things that are even worse than the grave. For the grave is tragically an inescapable aspect of life, but as painful as it is, the grave by itself is actually not the gravest injustice. The grave by itself is actually not the gravest injustice, especially in this nation built on white supremacy. But the gravest injustice is about who disproportionately goes to the grave, and when, and why, and how, and who gets to live while others are left to die. So yes, Jesus gets extreme and says, if I have to stop a funeral, then just will stop the funeral, because there's a future that needs creating and it's not subject to negotiation. Beloved, there is a future that needs creating where Tyree Nichols is alive today. Beloved, there is a future that needs creating where Tyree Nichols is alive today and safe in the arms of the same mother he died crying out for, safely balanced on the axles of his skateboard, safely pointing his lens towards the sunset with no police violence on the horizon. Beloved, there is a future that needs creating where Keenan Anderson is alive today, Beloved, there is a future that needs creating where Keenan Anderson is alive today to father his children and to teach his students how to make short stories come to life at every intersection. And in that future, there are no cops at any intersections. Beloved, there is a future that needs creating right here in Pasadena. Right here in Altadena, where Charles Towns, Anthony McLean, and Kendrick McDade are still alive, still breathing, and still dreaming, absent the nightmare of being killed by the police. Beloved, there is a future. Let me take a sip of this water. Beloved, there is a future that needs creating where there are no police. Oh, that's a tough one, Mike. I knew I wasn't going to get a lot of applause on that one. Look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, he's not taking it personal. There is a future that needs creating where there are no police. And honestly, whether you are in this building and you believe in police abolition or police reform or something in between or none of that, I think we can all agree. I think we can all agree on this one future. I think we can all agree that wouldn't it be incredible to live in a world so filled with the resources we all needed and so filled with justice and peace that we had no need for the police? Wouldn't you want to live in that world where we didn't need the police? I got married. I'll tell you a story. 7 years ago this July. Wow, that has flown by. Hey, babe, if you're watching. 7 years ago this July. And it was right before our wedding almost wasn't able to happen because it's 2016. It was right the week before was all these wildfires. Y'all remember the San Gabriel Mountains had caught on fire in 2016? And the week after that was our wedding, so we barely snuck it in there. But 7 years ago this July, in a city just north of Monrovia called Bradbury. Anybody ever been to Bradbury? Right? It is beautiful, idyllic, rolling hills and ranch houses and horses. And some dear friends of ours were kind enough to host our wedding in their yard up in Bradbury. I've seen a lot of horses. I've seen a lot of beautiful trees, a lot of beautiful winding roads. You know what I ain't never seen in Bradbury? A cop. Matter of fact, I ain't never seen a cop car, let alone a cop outside of a car like policing people. Because, beloved, the police are only necessary where there is inequity, poverty, and a lack of resources. And when those conditions exist, it is then necessary to contain those people in those zones so they don't get any ideas. And in the case of America, so you can profit off their labor once you incarcerate them. But, beloved, there is a future that needs creating, that we can all live in, where there is so much resources and abundance. And the reality is that we have the resources. There's enough. Scarcity is a myth of white supremacy. We have enough. It's just being hoarded. But there's a future that we get to create, where there is so much resource and so much abundance and so much justice and so much peace that we don't need the police. So if you can picture Bradbury or Beverly Hills or certain parts of Pasadena, then you can picture a world without the police. It ain't that hard to do. It's okay. Look at your another neighbor and say, other neighbor, he's still not taking it personal. Beloved, there's a future that needs creating, where those experiencing the generational trauma and personal despair, no doubt connected to the pains of forced migration, imperialism, and xenophobia, can get a therapist, medication, and an intervention more easily than they can get a gun. Beloved, there is a future that needs creating where Asian hate and anti-blackness aren't pitted against one another in white supremacy's narrative of oppression Olympics, but where both Asian hate and anti-blackness don't even exist because we've collectively dismantled the systems that thrive on their presence. Beloved, today there is a future that needs creating where as a society, can you imagine us deliberating on the best way to dispose of these relics called assault weapons? Beloved, there is a future that needs creating where climate activists like Manuel Paz-Terán aren't murdered by the police because the forest is left alone and nature is left to thrive. Now you see why Jesus might say, stop the funeral? Now you see why Jesus might say, stop the funeral? Because there is a future that is even more urgent than a funeral. And it's not that Jesus is driving us past grief, but it's that Jesus is driving us towards the future. And he's giving us the chance and the opportunity to grapple with the costs. And he asks us, what are you willing to pay for the future you're wanting to see? Will we pay the costs for this future? Are we willing to pay the costs as a nation built on white supremacy? Is this nation willing to pay the cost? Is this, some would call, Christian nation willing to pay the cost? And so often historically, this nation, this Christian nation, has said no to paying the cost of the future it wants to see. That it is stated in its own constitution, which is why Dr. King in 1963 says that instead of honoring its sacred obligation within its constitution, America has given black people a bad check, a check that has come back marked insufficient funds. Time and again we've seen America say no to paying the cost for the future that it says it wants to see. America paid the cost of an entire civil war, experienced a brief period of light called Reconstruction, and decided that the cost of a country moving towards racial equity wasn't worth surrendering white supremacy. And as Brian Stevenson points out, the North won the physical war, but lost the narrative war, and the story of white supremacy in America persisted. Time and again, America has said no to paying the cost for the future that it wants to see. But I've got a little bit of good news this morning. Look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, he's got a little bit of good news this morning. And that little bit of good news is we don't have to wait. That little bit of good news is we don't have to wait for a country staunchly committed to white supremacy and white Jesus to decide if it wants to pick up the tab on freedom. We can pool our resources and our wills together and do it ourselves. Oh, that's good news right there. Somebody ought to give God a praise. And historically, that's what we've done. I'm so glad, beloved, that Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth didn't wait for America to pick up the tab and pay the cost on my ancestors' freedom from enslavement, but they did it themselves. Beloved, I'm so glad that Ida B. Wells didn't wait for America, but she traveled the country exposing the cruelty of lynching. Beloved, I'm so glad that Bayard Rustin, Fannie Lou Hamer, Dr. Martin Luther King, Andrew Young, Stokely Carmichael, Malcolm X, Yuri Kochiyama didn't wait for America to pick pick up the tab on freedom, but they pooled their resources together and they did it themselves. I'm so glad that Angela Davis, Frederica Newton, Shirley Chisholm, Grace Lee Boggs, and others didn't wait for America to pick up the tab on liberation, but they pooled their resources together and said, we'll do it ourselves. I wonder in this room today, are there any people at 132 North Euclid Avenue who aren't waiting for America to decide if it wants to pick up the tab on freedom and liberation and justice and wholeness, but are willing to pool their resources together and do it themselves? Who won't even wait for the white evangelical church or the white mainline church, but who walk with a revolutionary Jesus, who are willing to pool their resources together and do it themselves. I just did a forum with Jasmine Schuper. I don't know if Jasmine's here. Jasmine, are you here? I don't know if she's here, but I'm gonna shout you out. Many of us would say we want a world in which the racial wealth gap is closed. And right here at All Saints Church, Pasadena, just interviewed Jasmine Schuper, the founder and executive director of Green Line Housing. There is literally an opportunity today to literally pay for the cost for a future here in LA where the racial wealth gap is closed and where we're resisting the economic violence of redlining. I'm so glad for the Jasmine Schupers who weren't waiting for America to pick up the tab on reparations. We don't have to wait. Beloved, if I'm honest, I'll show you something. This is my manuscript. This is where it kind of stops. And the sermon's pretty finished because I'm just tired, y'all. I'm just tired. It's been an overwhelming week. And to be honest, in my body, I don't know if I want to be here doing this. So I did the best I could, and this is kind of where it ended. It's like 2 more paragraphs here, and I'll read them, and then I'll get out of the way. I want us to take a deep breath. Let's take a deep breath in. Take a deep breath out. And just close your eyes if that feels safe and comfortable for you to do. Find a good rhythm of breathing. Now, there's a cost to following Jesus. I'm going to keep talking as you're breathing. There's a cost to following Jesus, co-creating the future with Jesus. But the good news is there's also that cost of following Jesus is accompanied by the care that comes with following and walking with Jesus. And there are 2 stories in Matthew's gospel. One that comes right before the passage that we read today, one that comes right after it. The one that comes before this passage is about Jesus healing the sick, taking up people's infirmities and bearing their diseases. And the passage after this one is about Jesus calming the storm that his disciples find themselves in. So there's a cost to following Jesus, and there's a cost to co-creating the future with Jesus, but there's a care that's also associated with walking and co-creating the future with Jesus. And so since my sermon is honestly unfinished, because I feel unfinished in my own soul this morning, I just want to lead us to the place of that care. So just take a moment, since this is about maybe 10 minutes shorter than it usually is. Y'all like these shorter ones. Oh, okay, there was an amen there. Wow. Duly noted, duly noted. especially but not exclusively, but especially if you are Black, if you are one of our siblings in the AAPI community, the week we have endured and are enduring, and really for all of us, this has been a traumatic week, but we can lean into not just the cost of following and co-creating with Jesus, but this is an opportunity to lean into the care of following and co-creating with Jesus. Because he is still the one who heals our diseases and bears our infirmities. There's an old church saying that says, can't nobody do me like Jesus. Can't nobody do me like the Lord. This is a moment to just be in the presence of Jesus. This is a moment to be present with our grief in the presence of Jesus. So just keep that rhythm of breathing. I just want to give us 3 minutes. I know that sounds like a short time, but we're not used to doing this, so it'll feel like a long time. I just want to give us 3 minutes to just sit in silence, to breathe, to grieve, to pray. You can pray for the person next to you out loud or in your head. We're Episcopalians, that'll probably be in our heads. So just pray for the person next to you. I just want to give us some space to lean into the care of Jesus. Again, especially if you are in a body that has been racked with the trauma of anti-Black racism, the trauma of gun violence and Asian hate this week. Let us lean into the care of Jesus. name of the Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer, amen.